In this video, we're going to be taking a look at adding and subtracting decimals, and I want you to get out your Go Math book and turn to page 113, get out your math journal and a pencil. Now the first thing we're going to be taking a look at is the essential question, and that is how do you add and subtract decimals? So let's take a look at the Explore Real World activity. And first of all, we're going to look at modeling decimal addition. So it says you have probably used decimal grids to model decimals. For example, the decimal 25 hundredths or 25 over 100 can be modeled by shading 25 squares in a 10 by 10 grid. 10 by 10 grid is what you can see below here. You can also use decimal grids to add decimal values as well. So there's a couple things that you probably already knew, but it's good to just refresh your mind on that. So let's take a look at that next section. It says a chemist combines 17 hundredths milliliters of water and 49 hundredths milliliter of hydrogen peroxide in a beaker. How much total liquid is in the beaker? So section A, we need to think about how many grid squares should you shade to represent 17 hundredths milliliter of water and why. Okay, and for this, and you can do this with me, what we're going to do with this one is we have 17. All right, and the reason for that, because 0.17 or 17 hundredths means 17 over 100. Okay, so in other words, 17 of the 100 smaller squares in a 10 by 10 grid are shaded in. 17 are shaded in out of 100. Let's look at letter B. How many grid squares should you shade to represent 49 hundredths milliliter of hydrogen peroxide? And for this answer, we'll write 49. Okay, and the reason for that is 49 hundredths equals 49 over 100. Okay, so letter C. So we know how many we need to shade for 17 hundredths, how many for 49 hundredths. So what you can see here, I'm just going to do separate squares here. So I'm going to do 17 of these. So whole entire row is 10. Then from there I'm going to count 3 over. 1, 2, 3, and then shade the rest of these. So 17 squares, so that's what that looks like. So letter C, I want you to do this as well with me. All right, so it says use the grid to the right to model addition. Use one color for 17 milliliters of water and another color for 49 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide. So I did one color, 17. If you have colored pencils, great. If you just want to shade one darker than the other, that's completely fine as well. So I had 17 for 17 hundredths, and then I'm going to do another color for 49 hundredths. Okay, so I'm going to color these 3 in. I'll know that. Then I'm going to color 4 rows. 1, try to do as straight as I can. 2, 3, 4. So now I have 43 because I colored 3 at the top, and then 6 more on this row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so from this, what we can see is there are 66 squares shaded in. So the total liquid in the beaker is 17 hundredths plus 49 hundredths equals 66 hundredths milliliters. You can write that in as well. Now let's take a look at number 1. Look at this one together. We have 24 hundredths plus 71 hundredths. So the first thing we do, we can go horizontal, or we can also go vertical with our rows as well. We'll go vertical. So one color, 21 hundredths. So I'm going to do 2 rows for 21. For 20, I should say, and then 4 squares meant for 24. So 4 squares for 24 hundredths, and now we need to do 71 hundredths. So this is 6 squares. That's 16. That's 26. 36. 46. 56. 66. Can't do the whole entire one. So 67, 68, 69, 70, and 71. Okay, so you should see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares left over. I think I might have shaded an extra one there, so 5 squares should be left over. All right, and you could see that 24 hundredths plus 71 hundredths equals 95 hundredths. You can see 95 out of those 100 squares are shaded in. Now, what I want you to do is number 2 all by yourself, and when you're finished, you can see the answer. So I want you to work on this now. So for the answer for this problem is 73 hundredths, and you should have 73 of those squares shaded in. So 8 hundredths of the 10 by 10 grid is just 8 of those smaller squares shaded in. Let's take a look at the problems on page 114. All right, let's take a look at just regular adding decimals. It says adding decimals is similar to adding whole numbers. First, align the numbers by place value. That's very important. Start adding at the right and regroup when necessary. Bring the decimal point into your answer. Bring down the decimal point into your answer. So it is very important to understand that just because there's a decimal does not mean that 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4 anymore. Decimals should not make you become scared. They should not haunt you in your dreams or anything like that. They're just nice, friendly little points or dots that are used to show place value. Okay, and we can make sure we line up those friendly little decimals, and we can add everything very easily. So it says, for the problem, Susan rode her bicycle 3 12 miles on Monday and 4 7/10 miles on Tuesday. How many miles does she ride in all? So the first thing we need to do is align the decimal points. We can add the zeros as placeholders when necessary. So if we were to write this out, 3 12 hundredths, and then we have 4 7/10, we'll have a 7 there, and we get a little confused right here. So if you add a 0 at the end of a decimal, that does not add any value at all. It's kind of like the opposite with whole numbers. If you add zeros to the left, it does not add any value either. Okay, so you're able to do that. And then you can align the decimals. You can see we add from right to left still. So we still start over here, and we move to the left as we add. And then we can see that Susan rode 7 82 hundredths miles in all. Now, if you want to use estimation, you can. You can see you can estimate this to the nearest whole number. That's a 3. That's a 5. As we round to the nearest whole number, that's 8. So you can see that it is a reasonable answer. Now, let's take a look at the reflect part in number 3. Why can you rewrite 4 7/10 as 4 70 hundredths? So we can see, and I want you to write this answer down, 7/10 has the same area model as 70 hundredths. Okay, so 4 7/10 equals 4 70 hundredths. And what we mean by area model, think about the 10 by 10 grid. 4 7/10 would shade in the same exact as 4 70 hundredths. So let's think about, why is it important to align the decimal points when adding? I want you to write this down. Aligning the decimal points ensures that you are adding digits with the same place value. So if you do not line up these digits in the same place value or by the decimal, so let's say we just did it by the digits, so we have 3 12 hundredths, and we can have 4 7/10. You could see we would be adding a whole number to the tenths, a tenths to the hundredths. Okay, it would just be all wrong. Okay, so make sure you line up the place value first. That's very, very important. All right, now let's take a look at a couple of these we'll do together. Let me erase some things here. All right, so let's do number 5 together. So we have 42 hundredths plus 27 hundredths. So we have 0.42. and then we have 0 and 27 hundredths. So the first thing we have to do is align the decimal points. Now, once we have everything aligned, we can start adding, going from right to left. 2 and 7, even though it's in the hundredths, doesn't mean it's 50,000, because we're dealing with decimals. 2 plus 7 still equals 9. 4 plus 2 still equals 6. All right, we can drop our decimal point now. We can even put a 0 there. So we have the answer of 69 hundredths for number 5. Now let's take a look at number 7 together. Number 7 is 3 and 25 hundredths. Remember, you have to line up the decimal point versus the digits. 3 and 25 hundredths, adding 4 and 6 tenths. You can put a 0 to the right of that. And the reason why I put a 0 to the right of that, it just lines everything up nice and neat. We don't have any empty spaces there. That 5 might get lonely being in the hundredths all by itself. So we have 5 plus 0 gives us 5. 2 and 6 gives us 8. We drop our decimal point. 3 plus 4 is 7 for 7 and 85 hundredths for the answer. Now what I want you to do is number 8 all by yourself, and you can work on that now. So you can see the answer for number 8 is 21 and 15 hundredths for the answer. So let's take a look at subtracting decimals now. So you can see the procedure for subtracting decimals is similar to the procedure for adding decimals. The only thing is you're subtracting versus adding. So first thing that you want to do, well, we have a problem here. Maya is 160 and 2/10 centimeters tall. Rosa is 165 and 1/10 centimeters tall. How much taller is Rosa than Maya? And whenever you're comparing things, you always need to subtract. So we have 165 and 1/10. So I'm just going to write this out for you. So 165 and 1/10. So we're subtracting decimals now. And then we're going to subtract 160 and 2/10. So you can see I've lined up the decimal, and we're going to subtract. And I may need to regroup. I'm going to subtract from right to left. I cannot take 2 away from 1, so I need to borrow from my 1's place, make that 5 into a 4, make that 11. I'm sorry, that 1 into an 11. Now we can subtract. 11 minus 2 is 9. My decimal point I just dropped down. 4 minus 0 is 4. So I have 4 and 9/10. So I can see that Rosa is 4 and 9/10 centimeters taller than Mia. You can check to see if the answer is reasonable. So I can make that 165 and 1/10. So I can make that into 165. I can round that 160 to 160. 160 and 2/10, so 160. Can subtract here. That does equal 5. Okay, so I can see that my 4 and 9/10 is reasonable. Now we can see for the next one, it says Matthew throws a discus 58 and 7/10 meters. Zachary throws the discus 56 and 12/100 meters. How much farther did Matthew throw the discus? So this is a little bit different in that we don't have the numbers aligned. We got to add some zeros. So let me show you what you need to do. So we have 58 and 7/10. And then we have 56. Line up that decimal, and 12/100. Now what you need to do for this, to the right of that 7, you can see I don't have anything in my hundredths place, so I'm just going to add a 0. Does not add any value at all. Now I can start subtracting, going from right to the left. 2 minus 0, cannot do that. Change that 7 into a 6. Make that 0 into a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. 6 minus 1 is 5. Drop my decimal down. 8 minus 6 is 2. So I have my answer as 2 and 58 hundredths. We can, once again, as you can see down here, you can round using whole numbers. 59 minus 56 is 3, so I can see that is a reasonable answer. All right, so I can see my final answer, though, is Matthew threw the discus 2 5800 meters farther than Zachary. Now what I want you to do is number 3 all by yourself, and you can work on that now. So you should have the answer of 62 35 hundredths, and the reasonable answer to check to see if your answer is reasonable, it should be 62. I want you to work on number 6 all by yourself. So you can see number 6 is 2 57 hundredths, and to check if it's reasonable, you can see 10 minus 7 equals 3. Okay, let's move on down to that essential question. It says, how is adding and subtracting decimals similar to adding and subtracting whole numbers? And we can see you align digits by place value when you add or subtract decimals, just as you align digits for whole numbers. So this concludes the video on adding and subtracting decimals. If you have any questions about this concept, please come and see me.